Hello, my name is Ramos-Reyes, and I will be discussing a brief review of an article written by Susie Clarkson Holstein. The article is called Silent Justice in a Different Key Glaspel's Trifles and is based on the story Trifles, written by Susan Glaspel. Holstein's main point in her article is to state the difference in which women and men think and to state the difference in which women and men think differently, made it so that the women in the story kept evidence they uncovered a secret. In Holstein's article, she begins by giving a brief summary about the story Trifles, but then when she is done, she quickly states that to summarize the story in such a fashion would be misleading. She states that it would be misleading because the women did not uncover their evidence by accident, and it had much to do with why they chose to keep the evidence a secret amongst themselves. Since Holstein wants to state the difference between the men and the women in the play, she states some differences in her article, such as how the men move all around the crime scene, but the women remain stationary. She also states how the men did much talking and jumping to conclusions, but that the women were quiet and thought things out. Holstein did a great job at breaking down the crime scene and states how the men undermined the women and what evidence they would be able to uncover, which was an example of irony or a figure of speech in which words are used in such a way that their intended meaning is different from the actual meaning. Because the women were the ones who found the evidence that could convict many. Holstein also states examples of what the men considered to be trifles in this story. One such trifle was how the women were aware that Minnie was afraid of cats, and when the court attorney pointed out the empty bird cage, they both say that the cat probably got it. Yet, they both knew that the bird was dead in Minnie's sewing kit. Holstein does a good job discussing how the women discovered evidence by relating to Minnie, remembering her and imagining how it might have been married to Mr. Wright. They remember how Minnie used to love to sing and imagine the same way Mr. Wright took away Minnie's desire to sing, he probably did it to her bird. And in the end, it was Minnie's breaking point. I like the way that Holstein discusses other feminists like Glaspel's in her article. An example being the view of Antoinette Kolodny, who states that the men were not able to pick up on the clues that Minnie left behind in her house because they could not relate to her. I found it interesting to know that Glaspel's Trifles had been written over 80 years ago, but critics still use it to document the devaluing of women. In the end, in the end of Holstein's article, she makes a great statement by pointing out how in the beginning of the play the women were silent because they were powerless, but by men. But at the end of the play, their silence was not due to being powerless, but by choosing to defend Minnie. In the conclusion, I would have to say that I found Holstein's article to be informative, and that I could definitely see the point that she was trying to make. The men in the story, Trifles, completely undermined the women from the beginning of the story till the end. They did not take advantage of their biggest asset in cracking the case of Mr. Wright's death and that was Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters. Both women were able to relate to Minnie and easily uncovered the truth of the death of Mr. Wright. Had the men been more willing to include them in the investigation and not act as if what the women focused on were just trifles, they would have been able to solve the case. Thank you, and that is my story.